Hi, my name is Alex Dolphin, and welcome back to another episode of Ex Ante. Today we're going to discuss the case Carroll versus United States. This case was heard in the Supreme Court in 1925. Let's go ahead and jump into the facts of the case. So, Mr. Carroll is a defendant in a case that the state has brought against him on criminal charges for transporting alcohol in violation of the National Prohibition Act. So, what happened that led to these charges? Well, Mr. Carroll and a couple of his friends were approached by and interacted with some undercover police officers. These undercover police officers said, hey, go buy us some liquor and we'll pay you a premium. Well, ultimately it seems like Mr. Carroll and his friends were kind of suspicious. They smelt the rat underneath the undercover police officers, so they said, they didn't end up really going through with it. These undercover police officers then proceed to kind of stalk in a way, these men and watch them in their car driving back and forth from Detroit and to Grand Rapids, this route that was commonly used by bootleggers, those who carried alcohol for transportation in violation of prohibition. So eventually they see these men 2 months later on this path from Detroit to Grand Rapids, and these police officers say, well, they've got to be transporting alcohol, right? That's what they do on this path. And so they stop them and they search their vehicle. And they find 80 some odd bottles of whiskey inside of the seats of the car. And so the men are then arrested. The alcohol is seized because these men violated the National Prohibition Act. So the men argue, well, this is a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, which guarantees me freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures of my person and my property. And so they are appealing this case to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ultimately has to answer the question of whether a search of a vehicle like this in this case was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Let's go ahead and jump into the ruling. So Justice Taft, writing for the majority, dissects the legal issues here. And he begins with the Fourth Amendment, cites the text, and says, here's the Fourth Amendment, guarantees freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures, unless there's a warrant, right? And then he turns to the 18th Amendment, which prohibited alcohol. It prohibited the transportation and sale of alcohol. It targeted basically the commercial aspect of the alcohol industry. It didn't target people consuming alcohol in their homes. So that was the way that Congress was targeting that, and probably for Commerce Clause reasons. And then he walks through the National Prohibition Act, which this was the act that Congress enacted to enforce the 18th Amendment, to enforce prohibition, which basically says if an officer sees alcohol, they've got to seize it. And then there's also a prohibition that prohibits officers from searching private dwellings for alcohol, unless they're basically looking like bootlegger sale shops of alcohol. So it's kind of like this way to try and say, hey, if you're just consuming it in your home, we're not going to barge in your doors and take alcohol from you. But if you're selling it, if you're transporting it and you're part of this illegal underground industry, then yeah, that's what we're targeting with the National Prohibition Act. So Justice Taft ultimately interprets the Fourth Amendment to say that this type of search, where officers have probable cause or reasonable suspicion that alcohol is being transported in a vehicle, then they can search that vehicle without a warrant. And that is reasonable within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment, meaning that this search that was done by these officers was not unreasonable because it was based upon probable cause. And so the alcohol, the seizure, and the defendants are still on the hook. There's no Fourth Amendment defense for them. And Justice Taft's reasoning basically walks through the intent of Congress, he says, when enacting the Fourth Amendment. And he looks through some congressional history. He looks through the way that states have interpreted the Fourth Amendment into saying that, we got to treat cars differently from homes. Homes are these, sacred dwellings, whereas cars are like a little bit more public. They're out on the road. And yeah, it's easy to get a warrant to search a home, right? Because that home's not going anywhere. It's immobile. But vehicles like cars, boats, trains, those types of things are mobile. And so it might not be practical in all circumstances to get a warrant to search that vehicle. By the time you get a warrant, the vehicle might just be completely gone. And so That's Justice Taft's reasoning. All right, and so this is mini ex-ante. She was a little fussy, so we brought her in. This is my 6-month-old daughter, Adeline Elizabeth. But let's just jump right back into it. So that's Justice Taft's writing for the majority. Now, Justice McKenna and Justice Sutherland, they write a concurrence where they say, yeah, we agree, cars, they ought to be treated differently than homes. This probable cause and exigent circumstances is fine. That standard where it says, yeah, police officers can search if there's probable cause and there's exigent circumstances, which means that, it's not practical to attain a warrant in that instance. That is fine. But here, the facts just aren't strong enough to say that these officers had probable cause. I mean, they just saw these men driving back and forth, along this path where, supposed bootlegging was going on. But this wasn't the type of situation where there's all the facts and circumstances that would rise to that level of probable cause that would say, hey, you know what, officers, yeah, that was okay to search without a warrant in this instance. So that's the case. It's really interesting to think about from the perspective of hindsight bias, right? Judges are much more likely to find that there was probable cause, as would be juries, if the police officer actually finds alcohol or drugs in the vehicle or weapons, whatever it may be, as a result of the search. So it's kind of this hindsight, yeah, if you find the drugs, then how is someone going to say that there wasn't probable cause? Because there it was. So officers kind of have this leverage when searching vehicles. In this case, and the reasoning behind it has kind of led to that. Also, you could just think about, this is the Fourth Amendment, textually, it seems like they didn't say anything about cars or movable items. And so this is kind of like not really a textual opinion. It's more looking to like the purpose and the intent of the Fourth Amendment rather than what the text says. Person, property, vehicles are property, right? And so that's something to think about, maybe, whereas a different method of constitutional interpretation would have led to a different outcome. And then finally, what I think is important to talk about is that, the 18th Amendment was an amendment. It was enshrined in the Constitution. This barred alcohol consumption, alcohol transportation and the commercial use of alcohol, right? And so the Fourth Amendment was also in the Constitution. And so you kind of have these balancing interests where you have two amendments, kind of conflicting with one another in the way that we want to get rid of alcohol, but, we also have this Fourth Amendment thing. Well, so now that alcohol is legal again, right? The 18th Amendment has been revoked. It's no longer in the Constitution. Should we really be treating these two competing interests the same? The Fourth Amendment is enshrined in the Constitution, and we don't have this similarly strong constitutional interest behind prohibiting alcohol in the United States. And so the reasoning, though, has continued, whether that be impacting drugs, marijuana, alcohol, which is now legal, things that really weren't trying to be prohibited by Congress and all the states in the Constitution. So something also to think about. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you'd like to see more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye-bye.